US President Barack Obama has told Congress his country should not impose new sanctions on Iran if it's serious in talks with Tehran over its nuclear energy program. Obama, who has been speaking to reporters in his last press briefing of the year, has refreshed his warnings that any new sanctions against Iran could derail the current diplomatic efforts to resolve the differences with Iran.
What I've said to members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, is there is no need for new sanctions legislation. If we're serious about negotiations, we've got to create an atmosphere in which Iran is willing to move in ways that are uncomfortable for them and contrary to their ideology and rhetoric and their instincts and their suspicions of us. And we don't help get them to a position where we can actually resolve this by engaging in this kind of action. All right? Okay,
Obama says he understands why some U.S. lawmakers want to look tough on Iran, but he says the U.S. must give diplomacy a chance. Obama has further repeated threats that the U.S. keeps all options on the table regarding Iran if it fails to comply to the terms of the nuclear deal that Tehran signed with the permanent members of the UN Security Council plus Germany last month.
I've been very clear from the start. I mean what I say. It is my goal to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, but I sure would rather do it diplomatically. I'm keeping all options on the table, but if I can do it diplomatically, that's how we should do it.
Obama says any alternative to the path of diplomacy towards Iran would have unintended consequences for the U.S., and he added that it would be in the interests of the American people to resolve the Iran issue diplomatically. And of course, Obama's remarks come a day after Congress put a bill on the floor to slap new sanctions on Iran if it breaches the terms of the nuclear deal reached in Geneva last month. The new sanctions would also force the U.S. administration to support Israel militarily, diplomatically and economically in the event Tel Aviv decided to launch an attack on Iran's nuclear sites. Let's go to Boston and talk to Kov Afrasiabi, author and political scientist. Welcome, sir. Ms. Afrasiabi, just how serious is Washington when it comes to sticking to the terms of the November deal with Iran?
Well, obviously, President Obama's warning to the U.S. Congress not to proceed with this very counterproductive and negative draft bill against Iran is a step in the right direction, and hopefully the members of U.S. Congress, particularly in the Senate, will listen to him in light of the fact that we have also seen a very strong letter sent by some senior members of the U.S. Senate warning against new sanctions that could derail the interim agreement, which will go into effect and implementation process sometime next month. And this reflects a deep and highly growing division, not only between the legislative and executive branches of the U.S. government, but also among the president's own Democratic Party, given the fact that 13 of the 26 sponsors of this bipartisan bill are from the Democratic Party. So we will see how the Democrats will hammer out the differences over this, and hopefully this will not be enacted.
We know that there is a lot of influence on the Congress by Israeli lobbies. I mean, so how much do you think the Congress will give in to the Israeli lobby rather than the calls by the White House? Because many say that U.S. congressmen are actually playing the role of Israeli lawmakers rather than representatives of the American people.
Well, unfortunately, that's partially true, and fortunately, we have seen some counter momentum that reflects a lessening of the Israeli and pro-Israeli influence on the U.S. lawmakers, and the fact that the administration, the White House, has proceeded with this interim agreement that recognizes Iran's right to enrich uranium, especially as part of a final agreement, is very important, because this draft bill put forth by the supporters of Israel explicitly calls for the dismantling of the Iranian nuclear infrastructure, including its uranium enrichment capacity. And what is ironic about this particular bill is that its supporters call it as an insurance policy for the interim deal, which they themselves have decried and vilified time and again. So it shows the duplicity and the hypocrisy.
Of course, it's interesting. The new sanctions according to these new sanctions, it will force the U.S. administration to support Israel militarily, diplomatically and economically in the event Tel Aviv decided to launch an attack on Iran's nuclear sites. So what would that mean, do you think? Are we close to a war?
Well, well, of course, that any kind of unprovoked unilateral attack on Iran would be against the UN Charter, a violation of international law, and would be decried by the international community and would further isolate the United States. Just as this bill, if it's enacted, would target U.S. trade partners, as the U.S. Spokespersons themselves have admitted, it will divide the international community and it would fray the sanction regime on Iran, which actually is not such a bad thing from Iran's vantage point.
All right, we'll leave it there for the time being. Many thanks to Dakar Vafri Al-Sabi, author and political scientist from Boston. Thanks for your thoughts there, sir.